chapel today is going to be a little different. Normally, for the chapel hour, as you know, we have a pastor here. He'll come, he'll speak to us from God's Word. That's not what we're doing today. Today, as you may have heard or seen, there are some issues that are coming up in the life of our state. Specifically, there's an issue coming up with an amendment on the ballot that would take the lives of so many innocent babies. So towards that end, as we thought about chapel today, we began to think about who would be appropriate. Who would it be right for us to hear from? As we began to think about that, the name Miss Melissa Ohden came up again and again. And she's got a powerful story, a powerful testimony that I believe she'll be sharing in part with us today. And so, Miss Ohden, let me invite you up here to the front to our chapel here at Hannibal LaGrange University as you share your story with us. Thank you for coming.
Good morning. I come to you this morning from Kansas City. Woo! Yeah, right? I was at a dinner last night, and our speaker was Benjamin Watson. Anybody who follows football, right? Ben was a tight end for 16 years in the NFL, and I'm good friends with him. And last night was the first time ever that he said, "Nobody cheers when I say I played for the Saints or the Buccaneers," right? Nobody in the room said a breath. So it is my honor to be here with you today. How many of you have actually recognized my name, or maybe you've seen me cross your social media feed? Maybe you've seen me on TV before? Yeah, a handful of people. If you haven't, in reality, I have a lot that I'm going to share with you today. My joke was that it's sort of like drinking from the fire hose. I have a lot to share with you. Because when we talk about this amendment in Missouri, really my heart is the same as it is for your staff here at your university, which is this is an important conversation for us to have, whether there's an amendment happening or not, whether it's an election year or not. People need to know the truth about abortion and how it impacts each and every one of our lives. Now, the reality is that amendment, as you heard, is a really important one. If there is a vote in favor of the amendment, so the vote's yes, it would effectively mean that all of our pro-life laws that exist in Missouri would no longer exist. There's no parental consent for abortion. Women would have no legal recourse if they're hurt by the abortion industry. Babies like me who survive abortions would have no legal recourse, right? We are talking about thousands of lives ending a year, the lives of women being endangered. No restrictions, no regulations. So when we are saying no restriction, yes, that means abortion 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th month. And before we think, that doesn't really happen, well, first of all, it does. Statistically, there are at least 10,000 late-term abortions every year. And that is just that we can put our finger on. The exact number is much, much higher. So I'm going to share with you today how I know some of those things through my own personal story and data from the Abortion Survivors Network. So if you want to cue up the first slide for me. The reality is that whenever there is abortion, there is also unsuccessful abortion, okay? That's what our world calls an abortion that fails, or women stop it or reverse it, resulting in a live birth. I had a pastor one time who said, "Really, Melissa, a baby surviving an abortion is like the most successful abortion ever." I'm like, that's true, right? That is our worldview about it, but that's not what the rest of the world, right, that predominant cultural narrative about abortion has to say. So when a baby is born after an abortion has failed, our world says that's an unsuccessful abortion. One of the videos that you can actually see on our website that we skipped through, thank you for cleaning that up. We couldn't get the YouTube link to go live here today, but if you go to YouTube, our channel for the Abortion Survivors Network is the Abortion Survivors Network, and you can watch video testimonies of other survivors. So I'm going to reference some of it today as I talk about babies who survive abortions, but you can also go to that YouTube channel. You can go to our website. I'm going to show you a slide at the end where you can come face to face with more and more stories that remind us of the dignity and value of every human life. But the fact of the matter is, you guys, babies survive abortions. Babies were surviving abortion attempts before Roe versus Wade. Many survived during Roe, and babies are still surviving abortions still today. We don't hear about that in our society, do we? And frankly, if we want to talk about what's happened in this election season, we've seen this talked about in presidential debates, the vice presidential debate because of what happened in Minnesota with Governor Tim Walz, right? They were one of the few states that did have born alive protections and also reported it out. But they had such aggressive abortion legislation enacted in Minnesota that all of their pro-life laws were wiped out, right? Women and children are not protected. And that went so far as to then repeal the reporting of babies who survived abortions. It also stripped away them needing to provide medical care. This is a real thing, you guys, okay? This isn't just something that, is a figment of people's imagination. This is what has happened. But babies survive, as you see, babies survive abortion pill failure or reversal. Anybody ever heard of APR? So APR is abortion pill reversal. And pregnancy centers here in town can probably talk about it. I'm not going to go too deep into it. But after the first abortion pill is taken, if a woman receives help and support quick enough, she can reverse the abortion with the use of progesterone. So babies survive those types of procedures a lot these days. Babies can survive surgical abortions, at-home attempts to abort. I know this is not fun to talk about, hear about, but here's the reality that everybody is facing in our world today, that it has happened and it's still happening. We also see installation abortion methods that fail, or women stop those as well. So here's what I want people to recognize in today's world. So I do a lot of lecturing, not just to the public, not just to survivors and mothers, but also members of Congress, legislatures, right? You name it. What I want people to understand is that, especially in today's world, when people are talking about born alive infants, that is very much a thing, right? Babies do survive late-term abortions and are born in the final step of abortion procedures. But in today's world in particular, when women are taking the abortion pill and it fails, that is happening early on in a pregnancy. So early gestation, right? Think first trimester, sometimes second trimester. And so a woman doesn't know, often for weeks or months, that she is still pregnant with a baby that she attempted to abort. So born alive infants, yes, are part of this population, but the greater population is that a woman is continuing her pregnancy. And here's the truth, you guys. Even after a woman has had, say, her abortion pill fail, she might have another abortion with that baby. If we aren't talking about it, if we aren't providing compassion and resources, right, being that person that that woman needs. And I know this because I'm going to share some of these stories with you today. So continued pregnancy often happens after an abortion has failed. Next slide, please. So we are the only organization in the world that does the kind of work that we do. We are headquartered out of Kansas City. So we empower those who survive abortion attempts, no matter if they are babies right now and don't yet know their story, if they're 70 years old. We support mothers who have walked through it in the past or maybe are walking through it right now. We share a lot of stories and a lot of data because we want to empower the people impacted. We want to empower the general public. And ultimately, we want to make abortion unthinkable, changing hearts and minds to see the dignity and value of every human life. Abortion survivors epitomize this in a huge way, humanizing what so many people see as abstract. Those who are looking at this amendment and thinking, not a big deal, doesn't affect me, will look in the eyes of someone who survived an abortion. What's the difference between them and you? Begs a question, doesn't it? For so many, it's a privilege to simply be born. So I want to go through some of the terminology. The first one simply is, who is an abortion survivor? An abortion survivor, quite simply, is someone who has survived an attempt to abort them in the womb. So when people out there are saying, those abortion survivors, they're just liars, right? They were made by Republicans to restrict women's reproductive rights. No, man, these are real people with real stories. And the number is much higher, as you're going to hear today, because the reality is the population is much bigger than what most people in our world think about. Man, I wish I didn't have to do what I do and know what I know, but I am also so grateful that God called me to this work, because it has changed my life to know what I know and do what I do and serve God in this huge way. Do I lead a pretty countercultural life, speaking this sort of truth in the world? You bet I do. But I am so grateful that God has entrusted me with this, because this is really his mission and not mine. So some folks who survived abortions, so we're talking about failed, right? There are kind of these three buckets: failed abortions, reversed abortions, stopped abortions. And most people in our world think about failed abortions, and most of you are already like, hey, wait a minute, that woman looks sort of familiar. Yes, the very first person on that slide is me. That is why this organization exists, because I am someone who survived my own abortion procedure. My birth mother was 19 years old. She was a college student. She didn't live terribly far from here, actually, in Sioux City, Iowa, when her family forced her to have a saline infusion abortion. My grandmother was a prominent nurse in their community. I know she knew an awful lot about the scientific and the biblical basis for when life begins. But faced with that unexpected pregnancy, my grandmother knew how to make a secret forced abortion take place, bypassing hospital regulations and procedures at the hospital that she worked at. My birth mother went through incredible suffering. That saline infusion abortion that was forced upon her was the most common one back in the 1970s. It was an installation method. So they would remove part of the amniotic fluid to create enough room, and then they would insert this toxic salt solution, the saline, to poison and scald the preborn baby to death. Usually that procedure lasted about 3 days. If the child was fortunate enough, their life was ended within the first 24 hours. And then the rest of those 3 days were spent inducing labor, with the intent of that deceased child being expelled from the womb. I actually know through my medical records that abortion took place for longer than 3 days. It took place 5 days, because they couldn't successfully induce my birth mother's labor. I now know during those 5 days, not only did they believe that the abortion would be successful, but they started to think my birth mother was going to lose her life in the middle of it, because it was a late-term abortion and things were not progressing. That is also part of what scares me about this amendment, is that not only does abortion always intend to take the life of a baby, but it endangers the life and the health of that woman, and also hurts her emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. I met a woman just a couple weeks ago in Richmond, Missouri, and we had an interesting exchange about abortion. She was talking to me in her pain about the abortion she felt like she had to have years ago. But as we were talking about it, she said, but you know what, Melissa? Anybody who says that abortion doesn't hurt women has never been in my shoes to know the pain I have lived with. And I thought, man, what a powerful conversation she and I get to have, because I live with the pain of what it's like to survive the abortion. You know, I'm so grateful to God that after 5 days of soaking in that toxic salt solution, I was delivered in the final step, and God spared my life. There is no real reason why anybody like me survives an abortion. It is a miraculous thing. But I also know the abortionist had not provided an adequate exam, as most don't. My medical records reflected he thought my birth mother was about 18 to 20 weeks pregnant with me. But the fact that I weighed almost 3 pounds led the doctors to believe she was probably more like 31 weeks. So how do I know that late-term abortions happen? because I'm one of them. And I am one of many. As you see up here, we also have folks who are public. My friend Claire is the twin survivor of a D&E. Y'all, this is terrible to have to say, but that's dismemberment. Her mom was 13 years old and was forced by her family to have an abortion. That abortionist did not know that she was carrying twins. So her mom sadly saw a lot, right? Use your imagination with what she saw. Believed the abortion had been successful because it was in taking the life of one baby. As months went by, she realized she still had physical symptoms, and that's when they realized that she was still pregnant with another child. We have a lot of twins. Actually, I was just remarking with someone last night. We have a twin in Kansas City who was commenting on a story about me the other day. This happens all the time. We're everywhere. We also have 2 survivors up there who survived at-home attempts. I want you to see their faces to understand who this impacts. Next slide for me, thank you. We also know that chemical abortions fail. I'm not going to go too deeply into this story for the sake of time, but the Washington Post put out a story earlier this year, and in it they shared the story of a woman named Evelyn. I actually shared this with Congress back in June because I wanted to make sure they understood this. In Evelyn's story, she actually took abortion pills 2 different times, months apart. Both times, they failed. She was ultimately then given $12,000 to go out of state to New Mexico to have a late-term abortion. And that was my challenge to members of Congress. This is your solution to helping women and children and families, yet more pain and trauma? What if we would take that money and truly support women and families in our world? You know, the good news is she didn't have that late-term abortion because when she went there, the abortionist was only trained to complete up to 24 weeks, and she was found to be 28. Her baby just celebrated her first birthday after she made an adoption plan for her. But what if it would have been that way in the first place? So as you see up on the screen, we know that chemical abortions fail. Meta-analysis tells us about 1 to 8% of the time chemical abortions fail. Chemical abortions also have a high rate of incompletion, meaning that women retain the baby body parts and end up in the ER if they're lucky. Y'all, it's nothing to play with. That's not what we hear in our society, but I can tell you I see and hear the stories every single day. A stopped abortion is when a woman quite simply stops her abortion. We have some survivors who have been sharing their stories pretty publicly. One of them that you'll see here on the screen in a moment, and you see a lot on YouTube, her mom stopped her late-term abortion because she didn't want to go through with it. She was unmarried at the time. She was in college, and the dad stepped up and kept saying, man, don't do this, right? I'm here for you, and he intervened at the last second. If she wouldn't have stopped that abortion, the next step would have been that her daughter would have been dismembered. So women stop their abortions. Next slide for me. These are some of them. That's Lauren that you see in the middle. Her mom stopped the dismemberment abortion that would have tore her apart limb from limb. My friend Jennifer survived a vacuum aspiration in Illinois, just over the border. She should have had her head sucked out in the abortion and ultimately killed, but the abortionist couldn't fit her head through the tube because she was much further along gestationally. My second book, I have 2 books. My first one is You Carried Me, a daughter's memoir. My second one came out with Tyndale and Focus on the Family earlier this year, called Abortion Survivors Break Their Silence. In it, I share the story of a little girl in Arizona whose mom started a late-term abortion and got up off the table because she knew God was speaking to her to get up and leave. So yes, there are physical risks and complications that can occur, but that's why women need good medical care and mental health support, even after they stop their abortion. We also see reversed abortions. As I talked about, that's abortion pill reversal. And so a lot of pregnancy centers do offer that. There is hope even after someone has taken the first abortion pill, and it is highly effective. Some of the kiddos that you see will be on the next slide. They come out of Heartbeat International. And so we get to see some of these kids grow up. That is probably one of the coolest things that I get in my life, is that I get to see people like me who survive and live their lives. My birthday this year, a little 12-year-old survivor sent me gifts. And it is one of the most redemptive, restorative things that I can do, is to be there for people. You know, I didn't find out my story until I was 14 years old, and trust me, y'all, that was not an easy thing for me. It has taken a lot of healing and a lot of work. It is God and God alone that has brought me to this space to be healed and offer that healing for other people, and be bold enough in this sort of world to raise my voice, and now raise the voices of other people. But to be able to be there for little kids who would otherwise think they're the only ones that this happens to. You know, this is truly God's mission. I want to talk to you about a few other aspects when it comes to survivors. I mean, first of all, did you know that these folks are survivors? Cristiano Ronaldo. Oh, come on, there's soccer fans in here. I know it. Cristiano Ronaldo survived at-home attempts to abort him. Pastor Jack Hibbs, Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, a good friend of mine, he survived a coat hanger attempt to abort him. Sylvester Stallone, did y'all know that? That just came out recently in an interview with his daughters. It was jaw-dropping for his daughters when he said, oh, you know, essentially, hey, by the way, my mom, your grandmother, attempted to abort me with a coat hanger. So when people are shaking that out there, right, and going, we won't go back, I always go, there was also always a baby involved in that as well. We don't want to go back. But people aren't even thinking about that in today's world. So how does a woman find out that her abortion failed? I've already sort of touched on this, so I'm not going to go too deeply into it. If you want to cue up that next slide. You know, there's a few ways. Often a woman has continued signs of pregnancy, and often they don't figure it out until usually months after the abortion. Because, of course, women aren't told, hey, that's a human being, and P.S., abortions can fail consistently, and so you might find out you're still pregnant. Man, I feel like that would be a game changer if they would actually say that. I think it would change a lot. Women might also find out by visiting an abortion clinic, whether they go to a pregnancy center or they're going to the abortion clinic for follow-up care. And an ultrasound is really our big clue to tell us that the baby still survived. So we have women from around the world reaching out to my team of social workers who have a lot of questions. And so whether it's you or someone you know, you can always reach out to my team with questions about something that you are going through or someone else is. So how often does it happen? This is what I'm going to cover as we close today. This happens a lot more frequently than what most people can even begin to imagine. There are no really good stats, you guys, in the United States. We don't even have all states that report out the number of abortions performed. And in today's world, when we know that chemical abortions account for well over 60%, more like 64%, we don't have any idea how often the frequency of abortions are, right? We just don't even have good numbers. We have very few states that report born-alive infants after abortion survivors, and we've seen in states like Minnesota, even if there is a report, they are starting to strip them. Now, what we also realize is, just like I had in a previous slide, continuing pregnancy is really, really hard for us to track after an abortion has failed. So really begin to think about how high the number of survivors actually are in our world. It's significant. But what we see, if you want to go back one slide, that particular slide, looking at 3 different research studies. In one study, they found 39% of late-term abortions resulted in live births. Not something you hear about in today's world. And another one, this was a European study, and it was a sample of right over, I think, about 200. There was a 50.6% rate of failure. In Canada, which is actually where we get the best statistics on abortion survivors, live births after failed abortions, surgical abortions alone. My team found that they consistently have had a 0.21% failure rate. Surgical abortions alone. When we've looked at the other data set out of Australia, which is also one of the best because of the way their medical systems are set up, they run about the same failure rate year after year. So when you apply it to the United States, if we looked at surgical abortions alone, that would be 1,734 surgical abortion survivors based on that failure rate. Now, when the CDC in years past talked about hundreds of live births, I can tell you that when we start to look at those data sets, this number holds up to be very, very true. Because if the CDC years ago was saying 300 to 400, sometimes they said 700 to 800, well, then we have to critically think about how many there really are. So that number is a powerful one. If you want to skip ahead to that next slide. Another study that we looked at, and these slides, I'm just going to reference them all as we close. Our website is abortionsurvivors.org, and it's relaunching probably yet this week with all of these research studies that you can pull down and print the PDFs. We're going to have activism and advocate little kits that you can take to educate other people, because this is information that everybody needs to have. On it, we're also going to have a lot of stories. But in it, you're going to find this particular study. And this one came out of Quebec, and it was a sample of nearly 14,000 abortions over 32 years. In that study of second trimester abortions, it had an 11.2% failure rate. You guys, it was a robust sample. I'm not even going to have them go through the rest of the slides because it's really talking about the data. And what I'm going to tell you is that it is a robust study to the point that the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, who are very pro-abortion, I don't use that term for a lot of folks and organizations, but they have made it clear what they stand for. They published that this year themselves. Because in that study, they were actually comparing and contrasting how to prevent the live birth. If you injected a feticide into the heart, how much were you able to prevent it, right? How less likely was there going to be with a live birth? This is what has happened in today's world. So think about how often this is really, really happening. I'm going to have you push through a couple of slides. You can keep going, keep going, keep going. Okay, I want to hold on this one for just a minute. If you want to go back one slide. In that study, look at this, you guys. 20 to 24 weeks is when the majority of those babies were surviving abortions. That is also very contrary to what we're told in today's society, aren't we? Go ahead to the next slide as well. I'm also told by a lot of people, even members of Congress, they'll say, hey, Melissa, I'm sorry that happened to you, but this doesn't happen anymore. Well, first of all, this is God's mission, so I'm going to say this is relevant for me to be a part of the conversation. And secondly, I would say it's still happening today. How about you? Even at a more high level than what we've seen in the past. And if that amendment passes, you guys, I know what the future means for my organization. More women hurt by abortion, more abortions failing, more babies surviving them, more people I need to serve, more truth that I need to speak. But I know God goes before me. But that is why I'm willing to be here today and share the truth with you guys. If you want to fast forward to the end, as I close, I want to share with you our information. So as I shared, our website is abortionsurvivors.org. You can find us on social media. Our handle is at the Abortion Survivors Network. You know, even just this week, we had a survivor talking to Elon Musk at a town hall in Pittsburgh. That is pretty epic to have something like that go down. So follow us on social media. If you need some information or support, send us an email, connect@abortionsurvivors.org. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today.
Thank you, Melissa. We are so challenged by your bravery, your courage, and your message. So 3 action steps. coming out of hearing Melissa today. First, obviously, there's a ballot initiative here on the ballot in Missouri. Amendment 3. I would encourage you, vote no on Amendment 3. Second, you've heard a little bit of Melissa's story. You've heard a little bit of the story that so many women who are considering an abortion, maybe even had a child who survived an abortion, are going through. And you're saying, how can I help? One way you can help is we have a great crisis pregnancy center here in our region called Options for Women. I would encourage you to volunteer and get involved with Options for Women. Third area, and this one I'll touch just a little personally on here for a second. If you're in a situation where you or a friend are thinking about an abortion, please know that here in this community, you will find support and you will find help if that is where you find yourself. Thank you so much for coming to chapel. Let me close this with a word of prayer, and then we'll go over to lunch. Gracious Father, I thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ. I thank you that he gives life. And Lord, as we head over to lunch now, I pray that you would take the testimony, the story we have heard today, and we would act on it, and we would cherish life because you cherish life. I pray your blessing on all we do here at Hannibal LaGrange. I pray all this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.